So here we are down at the Cape Fear River, and what we're going to be doing is launching our surface sampler over the side of this dock. So I'm right now putting the cod end on. Now it's really important to remember that we put the threads on the outside. Most of us think, you know, when we put our socks on, we put the threads on the inside, so they do the same thing when we put the cod end on. But you actually want them on the outside because this would actually cause a lot of plastics to accumulate in there and much more difficult to extract. So now that we've got the cod end sock up onto the tubing, we want to also pay attention to this ridge here. We have one on this side, and we want to try to get the bracket around the top side of that plastic part, and that'll just ensure that it doesn't come off. And then we're going to tighten the bracket on as tight as we can. And it's always important after one person tightens it on that they hand it to another person to give it one more test. And believe it or not, we have lost a couple of these because we haven't done this one step. So it really does make a difference. Putting the cod end holder on to the net itself. This is 200 micron, and just so you know, you do not have to take this off every time. You can just leave it on. There's no need to take this off, just the cod end. So again, you're not going to want to take off the plastic housing that actually holds on the cod end, because it really is a challenge to put it back on. So you can just leave this side on. This is the cod end. It's like a sock. And what's going to happen is when we're done doing our sampling for a certain amount of time, we're then going to take the cod end off, and inside will be your sample. Now, another really important thing to keep in mind is that this is nylon, you know, just like nylon stockings. So just one little catch can make the whole thing zip right off. So we want to be really careful how we treat this net. Before you put it in the water, you're going to want to look it over, see if you find any holes. If you do find a hole in the net, you're going to want to use some liquid silicone in order to fill the hole. Let it dry for about an hour and it should be good to go. You're going to want to mark the date, right? So today is, Larry, 27th?
27th, yeah.
So June 27th, 2019, and the time is
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock on the dot. You would like to use military time. We are also going to put down the coordinates of where we're collecting our sample from. We have a handheld GPS here, so I'm going to mark it down. Because we're not going to be moving, we will not need to mark it when we're finished. If you're on a boat, you're going to want to mark the coordinates, the time and the coordinates of where you stopped. Also, I would recommend a flow meter. So a flow meter is going to tell you roughly how much water is passing through your surface sampler. And it also helps us determine distance traveled, or how much water or volume of water has traveled through your net. Okay. We do have our sample bottle all ready to go. When we are finished, we are going to sieve out our sample so we get all the water out as best we can. We might even take out some of the natural debris if there's a lot of it that prevent it from fitting in this jar. Then we're going to put the sample in this jar, put the lid on it, and then we're going to mark a lot of the same information that we took on the data sheet. We are going to put on this jar. So we know exactly what sample goes with what information on the data sheet. So you're going to mark the date, the time, the location, and coordinates if you have room, and then also the name of the person that did the sampling so that we can contact them in case there's any questions. Okay. So let's just say you are now bringing in your sample. You do not want to drag this net along this edge, because if there's any wood splinters, it could actually tear it open. So you want to be really careful, just like with nylon. You want to be real careful about what it comes in contact with, right? So when we pull it in, we're going to try really hard to just handle it by this part. and then somebody to pick up the tail end and bring it over the side. What you're looking at now is how the net is just barely grazing the surface, right? So this way, that surface water is passing through the net. If you had the entire net submerged, then it would not be collecting that surface sample, and we wouldn't be really getting what we're targeting. So we try to run the surface sampler for about an hour. And then make sure, again, when you bring it in, you don't drag it on the side of anything. Have a tall person with you. Thank you, Larry. Okay, bring it on the dock. And then you'll also want a bucket of water so that you can rinse it down and move everything down into the cotton. It looks like we did catch a live wire in here. I think I saw something. Onto the cotton. We write down the time that we finished. If you're out on the water, you're going to write down your coordinates. Again, where you are when you finished. With the flow meter as well, you're going to want to record your flow meter at the beginning of when the net hits the water and then the moment you pull it out. If you do not have access to water, we recommend that you put this maybe in a large garbage bag and until you can get it to a location that you can actually rinse it all down. So right here, keep in mind that the inside right there is part of your sample. So you don't want to throw your rope line in there. You just want to be able to try to not touch this area. And then rinse all of that down. It will go into the cotton, but any of the small plastic particulates will not come out through this mesh size, which is 200 micron. And then when you can rinse it all down, then you will disengage the cotton here. You will turn it inside out, again rinsing it into a deep bucket, and that way your sample is completely collected in that bucket. Be very careful not to put your hands in here or in your sample. So when you turn this inside out, you want to be very careful not to touch it. And then lastly, you're going to take that bucket of water and you're going to sieve it out. I happen to like this very large size one because there might be a lot of water that it's going to take to rinse this out. So this might be one purchase you'll want to get your hands on. And then once you're done with that, you're going to take that sample and put it in a mason jar. Now these we had combusted, so they've been put under high temperature, and therefore there isn't anything in there that could contaminate your sample. You will then write the date, the location, your name, the coordinates if you can, and the number of sample that relates to your data sheets that you'll also be providing us with. And then, after that, ship them to UNCW, and then we will process them for you. Okay. What we're going to do now is take our sample and rinse all of this down into the cotton. And then once we've cleaned it out as best we can, we're going to put it through the sieve over here. Okay? Maestro, water please. So even though water's coming out the side, the sample is not escaping. So you see I'm not putting my hand inside, I'm doing the outside. Again, you don't want to contaminate your sample or have it end up on your hand and then some of it escapes. Work it down. Now you're gonna see some brown brackish water. That means anything smaller than 200 micron is in there. We're probably not gonna look at it that closely, so, okay. So, but all of any plastic particles that are inside our sample are inside this cotton. There's possible or potential of plastic being inside here, so we're going to be real careful to rinse the sides first before we turn it inside out. Okay, Larry, you ready? Side here. Try to get as much of it down to the bottom as you can. And I'll get it very close. Okay, good job there. Inside out. And then we'll give it one more rinse. Cotton's clean. Yeah, you can try to get that. Okay, and then you want to turn it inside out again so that this is around the outside. I recommend putting it right back on the sampler so that it's ready to go for the next sampling. So again, we have combusted this glassware. And so Larry is now going to try to rinse everything down from the sides. And then very carefully, pour it into around one more time.
Good?
Yep. And that's it.
What you're looking for?
No, it's okay.
Don't need that now?
Nope. And now you have your sample. Next step is labeling it. So again, you're going to put the date, time, location, the name of the person that did the sample, and if you can, the coordinates. And then this will be ready to go to UNCW for processing. And then when you're finished labeling it, if you can refrigerate it, that would be very helpful. When you ship it, not so much necessary, but until you're ready to ship, I would definitely recommend refrigerating.